Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for coming to the cast iron cooking kind of workshop class today. My name is Ian Wilson. I'm the interpretive program coordinator here at Fountain Creek Nature Center. I'm also a very avid cast iron cooker. So we're going to look at a variety of things. So we're going to talk briefly about cast iron pans, but then since we're doing most of our cooking outside, we're going to do a lot of Dutch oven cooking as well. So we're going to show some different things. But before we kind of leap into that, I've got just a couple of announcements for you guys. So first off, if anybody is totally new to the Nature Center, hasn't been in here before, if you're interested in more programs like this, we do these year-round for all ages. We do adult programs as well as youth programs. This is our program and event guide. It's kind of the best guide you can get to kind of see what's going on. And this is our winter one right now. I've also got our listserv if you're interested in receiving emails that are going to give you updates on kind of what's going on, what's happening in the park. So I'll have this up front as well. And then also, for some of you guys who attend quite a bit, if you're not members yet, it's definitely something to consider. It's you get a discount on programs like this, and it also really goes to help support the Nature Center as well. And so all this stuff, if you're interested, feel free to hit up the front desk, and they can give you more info, sign you up, or however you'd like. All right. So to start, I'm going to just hand out these papers. I made up a little cast iron cheat sheet. So this is kind of just the basics of care and maintenance of cast iron. It goes into basically how to, if you just bought a new piece, it's really scuzzy and dirty, how you would clean it. It goes into what you would do for rust. And then also it goes into seasoning. So I'm going to just hand these around. And actually, could you just pass them down? All right. And let me grab my clicker. All right. So as I said, I'm a very avid cast iron cooker myself. I mainly got into it from doing a lot of camping, not as much backpacking, but car camping when you can afford to carry all this weight around. And kind of this pan, I brought it because this was really what started it. This was one that my dad actually is a big time collector. And he used to go to all these auctions, and he would buy these huge amounts of cast iron, but he would never use them. So he'd hang them up in the shed or in the garage and never ever use them. So when I left for college, I asked him for one, and he gave me this. And I've used it ever since, like almost constantly. And then what was really cool, in the last couple weeks, I actually looked this pan up and found out that they stopped making them in the 1930s. So this was actually about an 85-year-old pan that still has probably been used for about 85 years as well. And that really gets to kind of my main point, the main thing that I wanted to get across today is really the reason why I think cast iron is so good, why I think everybody should really make that switch to try to use more cast iron, is not only is it versatile, so you can do things with it that you can't do with any other pans. It holds up to almost any kind of heat you want to throw at it. You can use cast iron pans for frying, you can use them for baking, stovetop, and even on the campfire. So that's one of my big things, is that it's just so versatile. And then not only that, if you take care of a pan, if you know how to treat it right, then it lasts forever. It really doesn't have an in-life. You don't ever have to stop using it like a lot of other pans. And that's something we're going to talk about more during our little slideshow here. And then finally, it's a very sustainable choice. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about some of the hazards of using Teflon pans, and we're going to talk about that briefly. But even aside from, there's debate on what kind of things are coming off Teflon pans when you make it. But even aside from that, most Teflon pans, they say you're supposed to replace every 3 to 5 years. So even if you do everything right, even if you're keeping it low on heat, it still is supposed to be thrown away, thrown into a landfill, and then you buy a new one in 3 years. And I love that cast iron really gets away from that idea of like that disposable culture of you take it and you just throw it in the trash and buy a new one. Because, if you looked at 100 years ago, all their stuff is still around because it was built to last and you don't have to replace it. So those are kind of the 3 big reasons why I think everyone should try or consider using cast iron. All right, so just kind of our plan for the day. We're going to keep it pretty brief in here because we've got a bunch of fires going down in our main wood all around our outdoor classroom, and that's where we're going to do all of our cooking. We decided that to make it kind of exciting for you guys, I'm going to make you guys cook, actually. So you guys are going to get some experience actually doing, working with the coals, we're on our menu today. If you check out the second page of that handout, we have a chili. Now the chili I pre-made because it takes about 2 hours to cook and I didn't want to push it on time. So that one's pretty much all set. That'll just be for us to eat. Now we're going to divide you guys into groups of 2, and half of you are going to work on our cornbread, and then the other half is going to work on a peach cobbler. Now the deal, I'll show you our cast irons here. So this is a nice big beefy cast iron. This one I just picked up. This is going to be what we make our cobbler in. It's a really heavy one. It's a great one for stacking, which is what we're going to do. So this will be our cobbler pan. If you sign up for the cobbler station, the cobbler is going to go in first. So if you want to work on the cobbler, we're going to try to kind of get that one in quickly. And then the other one, the cornbread, we're going to cook in a style, kind of Dutch oven style, where you stack them and you put coals underneath, in between, and on top. And in this one, we're going to make our cornbread. Now, because we're putting this one on second, the cornbread folks are going to have a little more time. But the added bonus is we actually have an old burr grinder, so a manual hand grinder that grinds grains, and we're going to actually grind our own corn. So we got some Indian corn that was grown by the Miller family, who lives pretty close to here, out in Fountain. They had a big batch of Indian corn that they grew and they dried out and preserved. So we've got all that, so we're going to grind our own corn to make this cornbread as well. So we'll do all that food prep. Then while it's cooking, we've got some different activities we're going to do. And then finally, we're going to eat. All right. So to start off, very simply, kind of the first question is, what is cast iron? Well, it sounds very simple. So basically, cast iron is just you take your iron, you get it nice and hot, nice and molten, and you pour it into some kind of a mold. Whenever you open that mold, you have your cast. And that's what cast iron actually is. Now that sounds very simple, but it was actually a huge challenge to get to the point to make cast iron if you look at historically. So we've had the ability to melt things like copper, and we had the ability to make tin, and that eventually led to making bronze. But the thing was, our furnaces were never hot enough to melt iron. That's why, if you look at the different metal ages, you have like the Bronze Age, and then it eventually leads into the Iron Age. The reason why is because of the furnaces. It was so hard to get that temperature hot enough. So something that's just kind of interesting to me was, Chinese culture, they actually developed it in 513 BC. They had the ability, and they still have little cast iron figures, and some of their shrines and gazebos and things actually have cast iron support beams in it. So they had figured it out back in 513 BC. But that technology they never figured it out in England until almost 1600 years later. So that's just how long it took for that to spread to England. So it really was, you think of cast iron as a very basic concept. It was all about that furnace that kind of made it possible. So then once it did make it to Europe, it really caught on quickly. Cast iron, because of its weight and because it lasts forever, it really became kind of an item of luxury. It was like if you had that, you really held on to it. It was generally passed down through inheritances. Sometimes even a lady's dowry would include a cast iron pot or two, and there's a lot of evidence of that. So it was very popular in Europe, so it made sense that when people came to the New World, when they came to settle here, they brought it along with them. And so this gets to kind of, a lot of people think of cast iron as something very Western. That's a very Western thing to do. And here's some good examples of that. So this is Lewis and Clark here. I photoshopped our cast iron, but they actually did bring a cast iron pan along with them. So they used all the cast iron there, and that was in the early 1800s. This was kind of neat. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Mormon handcart pioneers. But it was this whole movement, it was when they were really trying to get to Salt Lake City and in that area in Utah, when they thought that was, the promised land. There was this push to get there any way possible, and there was actually a large group that, instead of saddling up a horse or instead of having oxen, they just threw everything on a cart and drug it all the way to Utah. And so this is actually a monument that's in Salt Lake City, and if you look right between them, he's got his trusty cast iron hanging there. So even that, when they're bucking everything they own across the country, they still thought to bring that cast iron. And then finally, I think this is kind of the quintessential why we think of cast iron as Western, are chuck wagons. So originally the chuck wagon was invented by Oliver Loving and Charles Goodnight. They were two ranchers that were making this big cattle drive basically from Texas, and they eventually went all the way to Wyoming. It started out as just going to New Mexico, and then they slowly added on. But they had this challenge of they were moving all this cattle from Texas north, and so you have to hire all these cowboys, and they had to have a way to feed them. So actually, Charles Goodnight was the one that came up and invented the chuck wagon. So he hired a guy that they would call the camp cookie, and it would basically be his job to feed the troops, feed all the cowboys that are running with them. And you'll see here, almost all their cooking was done on cast iron. So he even has these special slots where he can store all of his cast iron. So I think that's why we kind of think of it as this quintessential Western thing. So that's kind of the history of it. And then now we're going to get to kind of the everyday, how you're going to use it. So kind of the big bullet points, we mentioned this earlier, is they're super durable. You know, they last forever if you take care of them. The care and maintenance, something that's really nice about it, you don't need any special tools, you don't need any special chemicals or anything. So it's very easy to get into. There's not a lot of startup cost other than the pans. And then, as I said, it's just incredibly versatile. You can do almost anything with it that you would like. And we're going to show you some of that down in the woods. All right, so this is one that I kind of mentioned. So this is one that's in the media a lot. They talk about it a lot now, the dangers of Teflon. So basically, I did a lot of research on this. There's a lot of debate on how harmful it actually is. But basically, it's a chemical called PFOA. And when you heat a pan, if you get it really hot, now there's different levels of heat. Let me check this so I tell you guys right. So they say between 500 and 680 degrees Fahrenheit, if you subject a pan to that much heat, it's going to give off, they're called PFOAs. It's something that they use in the process of making it, but it can actually leach out, and if you're cooking over a fire, you can actually breathe it in. Now, if you think about it, 500 to 680, that's pretty hot, because even ovens, the highest they usually go is like 500. But it's still a concern, and it still makes you think about some other issues. I read a lot about, there's the worry of your pan cracking and it getting into your food. Well, they actually say it's inert that way, so there's really not a risk of it. It's going to pass through you, but it's not going to stay put. But I think of it, it's more a matter of no matter how well you take care of it, no matter how low you keep that heat, like we said, it's only going to last you for like 3 to 5 years. And then you're still just supposed to throw it out. Now, opposed to that, you could use this thing forever, and you might need some basic care and maintenance on it, maybe once every couple years, but that's about it, and it's going to last you forever. So that's kind of why I think it's really a good idea to make that change. So something to mention, if you have a disorder called hemochromatosis, it's something where you can't process iron. That's about the only reason why you would not want to switch to cast iron, because if you can't process that iron, it can actually make you sick. But kind of the double-edged sword of that, if you are anemic or if you have any kind of an iron deficiency, it's actually really good because, most things, if you cook with it, it is going to leach out in your food to an extent. Well, this is pure iron, so it's basically just the mineral. So it's basically like taking an iron supplement. So the same way, if you can't process the iron, then it might not be a good way, but if you need that iron, it's a great source of it. All right, so if you want to follow along on your papers, I've got kind of the basics of how you want to clean a cast iron pan. So if you see the one in the picture, this was actually this pot here. And this one was a little scuzzy. It needed a little work, but it wasn't too bad or anything. But I wanted to show you the kind of the basic, because this works even if let's say you go to like a pawn shop or an antique store and buy a really old, kind of cruddy looking one, you could still do this trick. So all I did was you take basically a large trash bag, you spray oven cleaner onto the surface of the pan, and you just get it basically all over, really sop it up. And then you're going to tie it tight so that it doesn't evaporate, and then you basically just leave it overnight, and that's going to really work on all that grime, all that setting grease and stuff. And then the next day, so I think this was the before, so that was when I was applying it, and then that's the final after. So after you soak it, it's very simple. You just take a rag or something, you just basically go through it and kind of polish it down, and then you have basically a brand new cast iron. It's still in great shape. So what you're going to do is after you've cleaned it, you've removed all of this stuff. So all of that grease and all of that stuff, which is good for cleaning, but also, iron is very susceptible to rusting. So anytime you're going to clean or refurbish a pan, it's really important that you dry it really, really well. And then you're going to make sure that you do your seasoning step. So when you're seasoning it, you're going to actually coat your pan with some type of an oil. Now that oil, it basically adheres to all the pores in the iron, and it makes that nonstick surface. Now what's so nice about it is where, something like Teflon, where they just sprayed this layer, you can continually put more and more of that nonstick layer on. So what I really like to use is just like Crisco, some kind of vegetable oil. And typically what I would do if I was just going to grease it up is I would just take this, run my rag through it, and just cover all the surfaces. You don't need a whole lot. You don't want any standing grease, and it shouldn't be sticky afterwards. But you want enough that it's fully covered. So you're going to do that. And then what you do is you put it in your oven. You keep your oven. I've read there's a lot of differing opinions on temperatures and processes with cast iron. If you think people have been using this for so long, there's going to be a lot of different opinions on how to do it. But I like to do it at about 300 degrees or so. And you would just take your cast iron, so after you got it all nice and greasy, you're going to set it inside of your oven. And I like to put a piece of aluminum foil underneath so that it catches all that grease and stuff. And you're just going to basically let it sit there and roast and slow cook for, they say anywhere from like an hour to about 3 hours, depending on how much it needs. If you take it out, and you kind of wipe it down and it seems like it still has a duller gray color, then you can just re-season it again. So just coat it again and put it back in there. Some really big cast iron like this one, I had to cure probably 2 or 3 times to get it really that nice non-stick surface. So that's kind of a good trick if you need to season it a couple times.
Question for you.
Yes?
You were talking about using the oven cleaner. That doesn't sound terribly healthy. How do you make sure that everything, all the oven cleaner is out? You're buffing?
Yeah, so part is you're wiping it down, but then you're still going to season it. So it's still going to cook off, similar to if you have like a self-cleaning oven. So it's still going to have time to, cook off and really offset all that gas before you're eating it or cooking anything on it.
You wouldn't do that on a new pan, you don't have to. With the oven cleaner, it's already.
Yes, so I would mention, so the new ones, the Lodge, like this one, they come with, they have already been seasoned. And generally it works pretty well. I would do it and just kind of clean it. Again, if you see on there, you don't usually use soap because soap can really break down that layer. But I would, if you get a new one, just kind of wipe it down with a wet rag and kind of clean it out and try it out. And if it works, then that's fine and you can just go with it. I've had kind of mixed success. This was one that was supposed to already have that seal, but it really helped a lot to do it again. So it's still an idea to kind of rebuild that layer. But that, I think, really depends on your piece too, how well the treatment is.
What about the Le Creuset?
Sorry?
What about the Le Creuset, which is...
Oh, the enameled pans? Yeah. Those are a little bit different because they have that coating on it, so you have to treat them a little bit different. You would still do the same with the seasoning in the oven, but I think you keep it a lot lower. That I haven't researched as much because I've mainly done the pure cast iron, but it is a little bit different if you have that enameled layer on the outside.
Do you grease the outsides too?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get the whole outside, the bottom, the top, and everything. It really helps because you don't have to worry about rust as much. And it looks nice. It's got that nice shine to it. And you can always see an old cast iron versus like a new one because it has that nice kind of black sheen to it, where an older one gets that kind of a dull gray color. So I wanted to back up and mention rust too. So this is, if you do a lot of like bargain binging and try to find some cheaper pans and things, a lot of the times you'll find rust spots. They tend to get them, around the edges or around the corners. And even something like this, that looks like there's no coming back from it. But you have to think, that pan is so thick and that rust layer is very, very thin. So it's actually a pretty easy process to clean. So normally what you would do, what I would do with this, the first step is just hot soapy water and just wash it out. usually that's all it takes. You just get it nice, hot, and soapy and really scrub that out. And usually that gets all of that rust out. If you need a little bit more than that, then I would, so once after you've gotten it wet and soapy, you want to dry it out and then hit it with some steel wool. And I like to use the 00. It's kind of right in between the fine and the coarse, but more on the fine side. And this works really well to get some of that stuff out too. So if you have to, that works too. But I would say 9 times out of 10, warm soapy water will get that rust out. You just wipe it all out, let it dry, and then do the seasoning like we discussed. And then you just re-season it, and it's pretty much good to go. So that's a way if you want to acquire a pan for a lot cheaper, you can do it that way and just fix them up. Because a lot of people see that, and it's like, it's ruined. But it really only needs a little bit of work. And then, so I also mentioned the care and maintenance. That's one of the, I think the best thing about cast iron is just how easy it is. So once we've gotten that great seal and we've got that nice surface, when you want to clean this pan, so say we just cooked something, 9 times out of 10, all you need to clean this is water. So the biggest trick, this is something I wanted to tell you because this made all the difference for me, was when you clean this with water, use very hot water. I usually use a kettle and just put the kettle on and get it boiling and pour it in there, and that gets all that stuff on. For the longest time, I would just run it from my faucet, and it would still be very stuck on, and it was a pain, and I was always like, that doesn't seem non-stick to me. But if you do that trick with the boiling water, it makes all the difference. So you do that, you wipe it out. If there's still some set-on grease or set-on things that you couldn't get, a great trick is just take coarse ground table salt. You could use sea salt, you could use kosher salt, any kind of salt, and just wipe it down with that. And that's just coarse enough that it gets the grains, but it's not going to scratch up your pan or anything. So that's a good trick, and I would say almost always, but if just the water doesn't work, then the salt will do the trick. If that doesn't do the trick, then it's probably time to re-season it again, because that means things are starting to cake on. And again, that's a pretty easy process. So if you find that your non-stick is starting to stick, then basically it just means it's time to re-season it. Do you guys have any questions about that, or any questions about a particular pieces you guys might have? These usually, I've heard that if you do it right, you almost don't have to. It really depends on how much you're using it, how it's stored. I've read a lot that there's something about if you cook a cast iron both on your burner, so it's getting this heat from the bottom, and in the oven, they say that's kind of the Southern trick when you think of like the old Southern cooks that never had to re-season it, and they've just got this great, pan that they use constantly. They say one of the tricks they think is there's something about that heat of both on the burner and in the oven that it just really makes that seal great. And so that's something that I've done with this a lot because it's really nice. You can, sear a pork chop and then throw it in the oven, or steaks, or all kinds of stuff that way. So yeah, usually you wouldn't need to. I would say if you were going to do it regular, it's still only going to be maybe once a year or once every other year. And it really just depends on your piece. I also mentioned in your papers about storage. If you've got these guys with these great big lids on them, it's very easy. Even if you think you got it nice and dry, there might still be little pockets of water. There still might be moisture. And if you keep your lid on it like this, there's a good chance you're going to get some rust in your corners. Again, it's pretty easy to clean. But to prevent that, you can just take a piece of cardboard, just cut a strip of cardboard, and just put it in between here and the lid, and it'll give it just enough room that'll kind of evaporate out, so you don't get those pockets of moisture in there that are going to cause that rust. So I think now it is about time to go outside. This was kind of a cool art project I saw where they actually made the 50 states out of cast irons. Yeah, that was impressive. I was trying to find them. I'm from Missouri, so I was trying to find the Missouri pan, but it was pricey. But yeah, so I think now, if you guys don't have any other questions, we're going to stand up and head down, and we'll start doing some cooking. This is going to be where we're doing our real Dutch oven cooking. So this is, kind of the more traditional style. We've used charcoal briquettes. Now over here you can see this is already nice and piping hot. I got this started right before I ran up to start the program. I just started this in a chimney. What I did was just make a coil of newspaper, throw all your coals on top, and then I actually just held this over that fire and it just got nice and piping hot. This is, if you do a lot of camping, this method is really, really nice because there's always that issue of dinner time cooking where you want your coals to burn out so it's easier to cook on and you're not getting ashes in your food, but you also want a fire for heat. So it's always kind of this dilemma, and you might have 2 fires going at once, so this is a good way to not have to do that. You can just throw your coals in there, get that hot, and then just dump that in like a little pit area, and you can just cook on that and still have your fire to kind of hang out around. And then finally, I said we were going to mention the versatility of it. So we've mentioned how we can cook over flames. We're going to do the charcoal briquette. And then finally, I actually pre-prepared some chili over there, and I've got that going on a propane burner. So that really shows you that, all these different methods we can do with these cast iron. They can really hold up to anything you throw at them. Good rule of thumb if you do the charcoal, this is what I'm going to do for all of them. They say you take the diameter of your pan, so it's like a 14-inch. You subtract 4 from that, and that's how many coals you put underneath. So if this was a 14, you'd put about 10 coals underneath and about 18 on top. Because you want, hot air rises, so you don't want to put all your heat on the bottom or you just really burn what's down here. So you want more on your lid. That's kind of a good rule of thumb if you're going to do it at home. So just add and subtract 4. So I'm going to get this to start preheating. And you don't want a lot right in the center or it burns the bottom pretty well. So I'm scooping some off. We'll still use those on top. But we'll just do a nice ring around. I went a little over because these have been burning a while now, so these are going to burn out pretty quickly, and we'll start another round. If you notice this bottom plate layer, that's something I would really encourage if you get into this. It makes it really handy, and it's much more fire safe because this thing gets just so hot while it's doing its thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this back up, and we're going to get another round of coal going because we'll need to put our coals on top of here, and then cornbread's going to go on top and more coals. It's gonna look like a big gloppy mess, but when it cooks, it's really gonna rise and spread out. We put all of that baking soda or baking powder? And that really makes it rise like crazy too. My cobbler folks, now that we've got it all set, if you would like some marshmallows, we've got some skewers and a bunch of marshmallows in here. I brought some mason jars here, and we have some heavy whipping cream. We tried this out last night and it worked really well. We're gonna fill it halfway up and make our own butter with it. Shake it, you're slowly gonna feel it condense, but there's always gonna be liquid. Basically, when you shake this, the shaking motion is gonna separate your buttermilk from your butter. So it's gonna look very liquidy, and you'll see this kind of a clump start to condense. Once it gets solid, we have butter. I just put this one right on top. Rule of thumb is if you're gonna do it this style with the Dutch oven, you wanna put the thing that takes the longest and the least amount of effort is gonna be on the bottom. And then something that takes is a little bit faster to cook, that's what you wanna put on your top. So now I'm just gonna scoop some coals out. And as I said, it's a little bit more difficult when you don't have that collar. I would recommend doing it with a collar, but we kind of made do for this program because we didn't have another one. But this works just as fine as long as you're very careful about the ashes and coals. So we're gonna move this guy. right, so this is really the moment of truth, because you have to really be careful that you don't knock your coals into your fire. It really helps. This one, it has a hinge and then something to press to, which is really nice because you can, it just seems to support it a little better. So it's not there, but it's really close. See how it's not quite browned yet? We want to get a nice golden brown on top, but it's cooking away just like we want it. So I'm gonna just turn this guy again, and then we'll do the same with this. So we turned it just by moving it. Yeah.